Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's consumer debate, where we'll be asking, do consumers really benefit from dynamic price tariffs? My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels. I'll be guiding us through this morning's conversation. So, in the energy space here in Brussels, we keep hearing that dynamic prices, which provide for an interaction between the consumer and their energy provider, are the best option for consumers when negotiating a new energy contract. But is that true? And if it is, why are so many consumers still on static tariffs, especially when flexibility is badly needed for Europe's climate targets? That's what we're going to be discussing this morning, following a presentation of BEUC's new report on the potential of dynamic tariffs for consumers. We'll be discussing why there's been so little progress on the deployment of dynamic tariff offers on European markets, and we'll also discuss possible ways to finally make dynamic tariffs and demand-side response a reality for consumers, or at least those consumers who want it. Of course, during this debate, you can use the hashtag consumer debates on social media to let us know your opinions on the subject. And you'll also be able to ask questions to the panelists. You can put those in the chat feature. And at the end of the panel, I will read your questions out to the panelists. So to get us started, let me hand over the floor to BEUC's Director General, Monique Goyens. Monique?
Yes, thank you very much, Dave. And thank you to all of you for being present and being interested in today's consumer debate. As Dave already mentioned, the debate is about a topic that is very popular in the EU, in the Brussels EU energy bubble, which is dynamic pricing and demand-side flexibility. In other words, what does that mean in a layman's concept? It's energy contracts that allow consumers to shift part of their consumption to moments where the energy prices are lower. Now, the traditional example is the dishwasher that you put on during the night, but that's a little bit old-fashioned because dynamic pricing is not just about night and day shifts. It's about much more granular flexibility, and that's the important part in it. From the consumer perspective, it is really a welcome development, and we as BEUC and with our members have been working since several years in order to promote this new possibility for consumers. We even have provided a few years ago guidance to energy providers on how to make consumer-friendly dynamic tariff contracts. However, as Dave already hinted to, almost 5 years after the clean energy package that was supposed to deliver dynamic tariffs to consumers across the European Union, we are still stuck in the Brussels bubble. In many markets, in many countries, those contracts are just not offered. They are not available for consumers. They cannot choose dynamic tariffs, or when they are available, they are still very niche. People don't understand them. People are not being promoted those contracts, and we are wondering why. And this is quite problematic because energy experts agree that demand-side flexibility is really key for sustainability of the energy system. So we are missing the mark while there is this opportunity that is untapped potential. Today, my colleagues will share with you the evidence that a dynamic tariff can provide many benefits to consumers under certain conditions. And that's, of course, the important part. And our analysis that has been run in 4 different countries demonstrates that households that switch to the dynamic tariffs will curb their energy bills and will be able to participate to stability of the grid under certain conditions. Today, we would, of course, welcome your remarks on this report, on the observations that you will hear today from our colleagues. But what we would really like to engage with you in is how can we make dynamic tariffs a reality for the people? This is really the next step. What is the missing link between what we all agree is the best solution and the fact that it doesn't exist on the market? So I would say this consumer debate could be a kickoff for bursting the technology bubble here in Brussels, and how can each of us do better, be it policymakers, be it market players, be it us consumer organizations, to realize that we need the demand-side flexibility to be massively rolled out. I fully trust Dave that you are going to moderate the conversations to get really tangible results that we can take back home in order to make this a reality. I really look forward to this discussion, and I hope that you will enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Monique. Yeah, so as Monique mentioned, we really want to get a discussion here going, and we want really brutally honest observations about why this isn't working, right? Where it is working in the limited fashion, what lessons can be drawn, and what really the barriers are. As Monique mentioned, a lot of consumers are familiar with the very crude forms of this that don't really fully meet the definition, but night and day tariffs, that's kind of the extent that, at least what I know here in Brussels, where dynamic flexibility isn't available, to me at least. So most people know that basic form. Why aren't we getting to the more advanced forms? Let's dive into that with a presentation of the report on dynamic tariffs from Sylvia Maurer, who is Director of BEUC Sustainability, Food, Health, Energy, and Safety Department. Sylvia, I turn the floor over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this consumer debate also from my side. I hope you can see now my presentation. Yes, very good. I thought in order to kick off the discussions with our panelists, I give you a pre-glance of the report that BEUC has been compiling on benefits for consumers of dynamic price tariffs. You can find the report also on our website, as well as the data collection, in case you would like to see the details after the debate. First of all, why does it matter? Well, as Monique said, it's very important that consumers can better manage their energy consumption because it brings financial benefits, but it's also very important for the environment because it allows us maybe to use the capacities that we have better and the grid better, meaning we don't need to install more fossil fuel power plants over capacities, and can also manage better the transition to integrating more renewables into the grid. It looks as if the presentation doesn't move, so I don't know why is that. There's not much what I can do now. Give me a second, I try again. Oh, yes, thank you. Sandrine, so you can take over. You can already go to the next slide, please. So what is it that we actually wanted to know? We wanted to know if consumers are benefiting from dynamic pricing and if it is working. And we have asked the consultancy to make different scenarios for us. So we have been assuming that there are some households which are not so much advanced. They are still using a car that is used with petrol and the gas heating. But we have also looked into households which maybe already have installed a heat pump and use an electric vehicle. And we have assumed that some people live in apartments or others live rather in a semi-detached house. And we wanted to have some model bills to see what consumers can save or how much they would actually pay. And the data collection has been done between summer 2021 and summer 2023, which means that was also a phase where energy prices were very high. But we believe that even though now the price levels are a little bit different, that the tendencies are still correct and the trends are still valid from the study. If you go to the next one. So what did we actually find? I mean, there are sometimes not so big surprises because the trends were known that people who have a heat pump do benefit a lot from this type of contracts, but we put some numbers to it as well. So when you look into the target countries, which were Belgium, Spain, and Italy, there people could, if they have a heat pump and a dynamic tariff, they could save between 460 to 1,350 euros per year, which is quite an important price tag. But even if people would have a heat pump and not have a dynamic tariff, they could also save considerably on their energy bill per year. Obviously there, the savings are good, but the high installation costs for heat pumps can then still be a barrier for consumers to make a switch to cleaner heating. What we also found out is actually that consumers do not necessarily need sophisticated technologies such as batteries, automated controls, and in order to benefit actually from the financial advantages of such contracts. You can go to the next. I mean, also, it's not a surprise that electric car users would benefit much more from switching to dynamic pricing. That's probably then a load that can also flexibly be managed. But what is also very important to know is that in our study, the benefits of dynamic prices vary very widely among the different countries. And that's certainly also something that we should have a closer look to still in the future. The only exemption from the 4 countries that we had in the study where there are no benefits for consumers is Hungary. In Hungary, prices are capped, and apparently if there would be dynamic pricing contracts, consumers would very often pay much more than even the double if they switch to an electric vehicle and a heat pump and they are moving to a flexible tariff than what they are paying today for their monthly energy bill. What is maybe also a very important message, if you go to the next, is that the risk of unpredictability of prices is rather limited, and that even when you are a little bit lazy and inflexible and you don't steer all your demands, but you put on the dishwasher during the day or your washing machine, that there are not major cost concerns. And I think this is a very important message to consumers to also give them trust, because maybe some people are not yet very familiar with this type of tariffs, and they could maybe have some suspicion if that is really beneficial for them or if they are like in uncertainty. What I also want to underline very much with this study is, if you go to the next one, is that actually dynamic pricing tariffs are, in our consideration, essential to the energy transition. Unfortunately, there are not enough offers, and that's really a pity if you look at the level of the financial savings for consumers. Because, as I said, heat pumps still have very high upfront costs that consumers need to face. And if you have lower electricity costs every month, it becomes much more feasible because your payback period becomes shorter and you have much more trust that you're not paying for over 25 years and not getting any rewards there. So we really believe that dynamic pricing is the missing link for the energy transition to more decarbonized heating, but also electric vehicles. And so what are our recommendations? If you go to the next, Sandrine. We believe there must really be a better choice for consumers of contracts. We also need to adjust the taxation systems, and consumers need transparent information. And we believe that this is super crucial for the Commission and policymakers to look into, because there will also be a heat pump action plan coming up probably towards the end of the year. And we further need to make progress in decarbonizing heating and making people's lifestyles more sustainable. And without having these dynamic pricing contracts more or less becoming the norm, we will not make that progress that is needed. I would maybe leave it there. As I said, you can not only have the report on our website, but also the data collection. And in case you have any comments, remarks, or reflections on it, please don't hesitate to reach out to the BEUC Energy team.
Thanks so much, Sylvia. Really interesting there that the effects can vary so much by country, and that even in that case of Hungary, consumers could actually end up paying more because of the capped prices. We can delve more into that during our panel discussion, which will start now. So let me introduce you to the excellent panelists we have with us here this morning. We have Michael Villa from Smart EN, a European business association for companies involved in flexible demand management. We have Monica de Volder, who is from the European Commission's Energy Department. We have Jaap Burger from the Regulatory Assistance Project, an NGO which examines energy regulation. We have Sebastian Blake from the UK energy supplier Octopus Energy. And we have Thomas Bobinger from VZVB, the Federation of German Consumer Organizations. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Monica, let's start with a question for you. What is the EU's role here in this? How does EU law regulate the national implementation of dynamic tariffs? And how has that regulation impacted the availability and rollout of these types of tariffs?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. I would like to also congratulate BEUC to this very interesting report, which I think shows great benefits for consumers, and that in fact dynamic pricing and demand response in general can be a win-win for the consumer and for the electricity system. First of all, I would like to start with of course, as you all know, the Commission's goal is to empower consumers to actively participate in the energy transition and benefit from it. And you could see it from the recent initiatives and also in the clean energy package, in the electricity market reform, in terms of smart energy services and new energy collective schemes. Now, I have to say that our major focus is on swift and effective implementation of the existing legislation. I mean here, clean energy package, especially electricity directive. As you know, this directive establishes the framework for fit-for-purpose smart metering systems, which are essential for the digitalization of and decentralization of energy system. This directive also gives consumers new opportunities to engage with the market while consuming energy more efficiently and without compromising their comfort, and at the same time allowing them to save money. We are closely monitoring the implementation of the Clean Energy Package and the Electricity Directive. It's not a secret that the implementation is not at the level we would like to see it. We see positive impact on consumers in terms of tools which are available to them. But of course, this needs to be much faster. So we are closely monitoring the implementation, as I mentioned, and we are also advancing on initiatives such as Network Code on Demand Response and Data Implementing Acts. Last year, the Data Implementing Act on metering and consumption data was adopted, and now there are two more implementing acts related to switching and data for demand response in the pipeline. So this is to also support with the technical rules implementation across EU, which I think is important to mention. As you know, also the recent electricity market reform includes new provisions, again allowing member state consumers to engage into the market, and that is by enabling more than one electricity supply contract at the same time. Technically, this is more than one metering and billing point under the same grid connection within the consumer home. So in practice, that will mean that those consumers for whom, for instance, going from fully fixed price contract to fully dynamic may be a bigger step. Behind this, there is the proposal, or the electricity market reform will enable consumers to, for instance, go for fixed price contracts to cover their basic electricity consumption. And if they have shiftable load, like heat pumps and electric vehicles, which were mentioned before, they can opt for dynamic pricing, more innovative offers. So again, here it's about implementation, fast implementation, once these rules enter into force, and there the Commission will also support this implementation. That would be from my side for now.
Great. Thanks, Monica. So I see there's a great conversation going in the chat. I should just specify, if you have a specific question for the panelists that you want me to ask the panelists, you should put it in the Q&A. It's the other button down there at the bottom. Okay, so let's turn to Michael next. Michael, we heard from Sylvia that some consumers are skeptical about the actual benefits here of these types of tariffs. So from the perspective of your members, who are companies in the flexible demand management industry, let me ask the basic question here. Do dynamic tariffs support the clean energy transition?
Thanks, Dave, and thanks, BEUC, for organizing discussion and for investing in this research, because it's extremely important that the European consumer organization is giving a positive message about flexibility for consumers. So to reply to your questions, yes, definitely. Consumers that opt for dynamic price contracts can play a key role in the clean energy transition. And let me give you an example. We are in a home with average consumptions, and the consumer can choose to heat its home two options: a fossil fuel gas boiler and a heat pump. If both these two technologies, so a fossil one and a clean compatible one, are both of them on flat retail tariffs, the gas option will be more cost competitive. It could be 100 euros cheaper than the heat pump option, but it's still 100 euros cheaper for the annual running cost of the two options. However, if you use your heat pump in a flexible way and you link that to a time of use tariff, you will save more than 200 euros per year compared to the gas option on a flat retail tariffs. And if you instead opt for a fully dynamic tariff, connected also with automation, you will save more than 300 euros compared to the gas option on a flat tariffs. So what do I want to say? Consumers, if they get monetary savings following the flexible use of their electrified and clean compatible assets, will opt for that solution that will enable them to contribute to the clean energy transition. So we cannot believe that simply electrifying our end user sectors, electrifying our transport, electrifying our heating systems, electrifying our industries, because this is also valid for industrial consumers, not only residential homes, we will achieve our climate neutrality objective by itself. But this will be only possible if we have a smart electrification of our end user sectors. That will be a win-win for consumers, that will indeed activate their flexibility because they are receiving signals. And one example is through these dynamic price contracts. They will get monetary rewards, and at the same level, we will contribute to have a more efficient system. Because if we are using in a flexible way the heat pumps, our electric vehicles in our homes, we will not make their use when it's gonna be more expensive for the systems. We will not contribute to have congestions in the distribution systems. We will not need to invest in investment in power generation to support peaks, because peaks will be shaved. So it's a win-win for consumers and for the clean energy transition.
Great, thanks, Michael. So there's an overview of why these are useful. Yup, we heard from Monica about the EU level regulation on this. You've been looking at what the regulatory situation is here. So what would you say are the regulatory hurdles that exist right now preventing consumer take-up of dynamic pricing contracts?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks to BEUC for this very interesting report, and I think it's a really important element because when we talk about regulatory hurdles, I mainly have in mind that some of those are, let's say, mental hurdles. So picking up on the point that Michael made about sort of, do we know how consumers benefit from dynamic tariffs, and do we know how the system benefits from consumers on dynamic tariffs? I think that that's still very much in the way, because policymakers at national level, regulators at national level are still quite hesitant to see how user and system benefits could be aligned by using dynamic tariffs. So zooming out a little bit and picking up on the point made by Monica. So whereas we have a sort of single European set of rules for the electricity market, and it's legislation from 2019, where today we're 2024, And if we look at the 27 European member states, some of them haven't fully implemented that. And where I say fully, it also means it's a really uneven landscape, sometimes even within countries. And I think, Dave, you mentioned your example, like in Brussels, not having access to a dynamic tariff, whereas if you would be in a different region in Belgium, in Flanders, you could choose between, I believe, 3 or 4 at the moment. Being able to choose is also another element. So how are consumers informed about the availability of dynamic tariffs? Do price comparison tools exist where you as a consumer can see those offers competing, let's say, in the same league as static tariffs? And obviously the fossil gas crisis that also led to high electricity prices over the past years has made some of the member states sort of reluctant to fully implement these provisions on dynamic prices for consumers, because they thought static would be a better safeguard against these high prices. But actually, this BEUC report is demonstrating sort of the benefits of that. Well, we could obviously discuss a lot of Kahneman's prospect theory here about sort of how people sort of are more try to avoid risk instead of sort of opting for the chance of benefit or profit. But I think there's a real point to be made here about making sure that consumers are informed, educated, that they know that they are being looked after, that there are safeguards in place, that there are technical tools to help them work with dynamic tariffs, and that these tools can help them sort of really see those savings coming in. And I think one last point on the landscape. So various member states have tried to implement sort of social tariffs or price caps to protect consumers. But the design of those measures was often not aligned with sort of enabling also the benefits of dynamic tariffs. And maybe to highlight one more from the electric vehicle charging space. So in France, public EV charging was brought under a price cap mechanism that lowered prices of public charging, but sort of amplified the existence of static tariff, whereas EV charging as a perfectly flexible demand would have been a primary use case for dynamic pricing. So I think on a European level, the hurdles are in a sort of uneven implementation of the existing regulation. There is no new regulation on the way. So I think member states need to step up their game and making sure that they fully implement the whole package, that they look at all the elements. So that means data exchange, that means smart meter rollout, that means making sure that settlement flows, so really technical, work well so that consumers are really rewarded. Because overall, it is dynamic tariffs that enable sort of the alignment of individual user benefits and wider societal benefits.
Great, thanks. Yep. So next, let's turn to a company that's been on the ground working with these types of tariffs. The UK has been one of the more advanced countries on this. So Seb Blake, how has Octopus Energy been able to use dynamic tariffs?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, Dave. Really looking forward to this discussion. I will try and follow your instruction to be as brutally honest as possible, and certainly I think try and look for points of disagreement with my esteemed panelists, because the worst thing is when we all just say the same thing and there's no debate here. So yeah, I think what has our experience been? So Octopus is a big believer in consumer flexibility, and the flexibility that we've accessed from our domestic consumers is now measured in gigawatts. So we've certainly experienced a lot of scale there. And there are 3 primary tools actually which we've used to extract that flexibility. One is the kind of conventional time of use tariff. And that might be kind of like, you know, simpler day-night structure that we've mentioned, but some do meet that kind of Article 2 definition of a dynamic tariff and really pass through variable spot pricing to consumers. And it works for some consumers. Some of them really like it. Some of them have been able to access really, hundreds of pounds of savings by responding to those signals. And we've seen steady growth on those tariffs. But honestly, I'm not convinced that they will ever be completely mass market. Those kind of very, very dynamic pass-through tariff structures. So where we've actually seen some of the other structures that have been more widely adopted, one is kind of just campaigns. So that's where, irrespective of which tariff the customer is on, we've used things like email-based nudges to inform consumers of a time when they can earn a revenue by turning down their consumption, or equally by turning up. And we've seen that really simple structure has been quite effective for getting a lot of scale very, very quickly. And then the third category is what we call kind of connected tariffs. So that's where, instead of passing through the really dynamic, volatile spot pricing to the consumer, we will connect via API to their EV, to their heat pump, and we will schedule against the market signal in the background and access those savings, but ultimately pass that through to the consumer via quite a simple tariff structure. It might be a flat rate tariff that is just much reduced. So the best example of this is our intelligent EV tariff, where we're able to quarter the price of electricity compared to the standard flat rate. And that's all done through us integrating with their electric vehicle and optimizing it. But that's completely in the background. The customer is then not exposed to those spot prices. And there we've seen really rapid growth. And we see probably stronger potential in those categories than necessarily the dynamic tariffs.
Okay, interesting. So that's the UK situation. Let's now hear about the situation in Germany. So as of the 1st of January this year, energy providers with more than 100,000 customers in Germany are obliged to offer dynamic tariffs. So that covers about 70% of all households. Thomas, can you tell us how many of those households fulfill the technical requirements, the technical prerequisites for using dynamic tariffs right now? Because of course, a lot of these require the consumers to actually have the tools at home. And is that situation improving in terms of the technical requirements that people have?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So yes, at the Federation of German Consumer Organizations, we also recognize, of course, talking to the other speakers who spoke before me, we recognize the benefits of the dynamic tariffs for individuals and for the system as a whole. Looking at the German state of play, we have good news and we have bad news with a positive outlook. So the good news is that with the new law that you just mentioned, the digitalization of the energy transformation has accelerated in Germany, because it basically finally fully transposes the clean energy package of the EU from 2018. The bad news is, out of 50 million connection points in Germany, 20 million have a so-called digital meter, and around 1 million have a fully smart meter, meaning a meter that can actually communicate with the provider and therefore be connected to the spot market, the day-ahead market, for example. The digital meters themselves, they don't have a communication unit, so they cannot. 1 million out of 50 million, that's 2%. So 2% of Germans have the technical prerequisite to benefit from a dynamic tariff. And around 2% of German consumers actually do use a sort of dynamic tariff. But you have to know that a lot of these dynamic tariffs that are marketed as dynamic are actually more a variable or a flexible tariff. And a lot of these tariffs, they also use things like standard load profiles with an average monthly price. And there is a myriad of offers that is very rarely fully connected to the spot market. So we're at the very early stages in Germany. As you mentioned, beginning of this year, there's even only the obligation. The right to have a smart meter for consumers will start from next year onward. So somebody who wants to can have it, can ask for it. But the positive outlook is that it used to be that providers can charge up to €100 per year for a fully smart meter. And to amortize those costs, you would have to have a lot of shiftable loads. The government has now lowered this price to €20 per year. And that makes it so much easier in the future to compensate the costs. However, we also do see new problems arising, for example, hidden costs. While the modern meter, digital or smart, costs €20 a year, changing the meter cabinet, so where the meter is protected from physical manipulation, can cost thousands of euros. And the consumer has to pay the cost. And a quarter of all buildings in Germany is affected. It's mostly buildings of 1965 where the costs can increase very quickly. So the message for the first part of this discussion is the uptake of dynamic tariffs is still very low because the infrastructure rollout has just begun and offers are only very slowly entering the market. And at the same time, consumers are skeptical towards dynamic tariffs. The potential for load shifting remains low because the uptake of e-vehicles and heat pumps remains low as well, and therefore the shiftable loads. We have done a survey last year, and consumers have told us 60% do not know what a dynamic tariff is. Only 8% could explain it. 89% of German consumers do not feel informed. 25% say they could imagine using a dynamic tariff if the cost saving is at least 10%. And most worryingly, the number of people who say that they do not even want to consider a dynamic tariff has increased by 20 percentage points after the energy crisis. So it went up from 28% saying we do not even want to talk about this to 48%. So when we talk later about what needs to be done, there is a big mental challenge, there's an infrastructural challenge, and from our point of view, there's also a couple of legal challenges, regulatory challenges that still need to be tackled.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Just a quick follow-up question. When you're talking about the protective casing that costs thousands of euros to replace, is that like the plastic around the meter, or is that something bigger than that?
Yeah, so there's, you know that from the old Ferraris counters, I guess. They need to be replaced. Then they have this protective encasing around. Then sometimes they're also within a cupboard. So the basement needs to be basically redesigned, reconstructed.
Well, yeah. Okay, so I'm picturing what we have in Belgium. I think yeah. It's probably the same. Okay, so we've heard from all the panelists there about the benefits. We've definitely heard that this is a nuanced situation, right? That this is complex. But I think the general thread is that demand response has a lot of potential. It can be really great. So Monica, let me put the question to you. We've heard that, it's so great and everyone agrees this is really important. Why has Europe made so little progress on making this a reality then? Because this doesn't seem to be a success story so far.
Thank you. I think there are several reasons to that. I already mentioned to implementation. I mean, if you just think about, it's not only about the developing flexible markets, but it's also rolling out enabling technology, so fit for purpose smart meters. So if you look at it, which in fact will enable demand response and dynamic pricing. When I think one of the hurdles is actually quite slow smart meter rollout. So data end of 2022 showed us that only 12 member states have a rollout of smart meters above 80%. And if you look at across EU smart meter rollouts, it's around 55%. And according to our estimations, by 2030, will probably be somewhere around 75%. So there is really, if we want to make it really at the large scale, I think smart meter rollout will just need to speed up. And we have been also discussing with member states, facilitating good practices exchange. But of course, that's up to member states. And they, of course, can roll out smart meters following positive cost-benefit analysis. So I would then refer again to the implementation of the electricity directive. I think it's about implementation. Then once we have, or whenever these dynamic pricing contracts are in place, then the next question is there a demand for these offers? And I understand that, and that's why I think also the point on electricity market reform, when I mentioned the possibility to have dynamic price contract for part of the consumption, maybe that can be also kind of a not that dramatic shift for consumers to go from fixed price to fully dynamic. So let's take maybe two-step approach. But I think it's very much, and I would agree with previous speakers, it's also about informing consumers. Do they actually know what they sign up to? We saw during the energy crisis that many actually didn't know what kind of tariff they are on. And that is also one of the reasons why, for instance, also the Commission was tasked in the electricity market reform and also in the gas directive to provide the guidance on what should be in the summary of contractual information so that people actually understand, because they need trustworthy information. Of course, it's about information before signing the contract, before making the choice. It's also, and it was already mentioned here, dynamic price contracts appearing on comparison tools. It can be challenging, but we know it's possible. So that's, I think, some of the things which just need to speed up.
Okay, so clearly part of the problem is a lack of implementation of the existing framework. But Michael, how much of the fault here lies with utilities? I mean, my personal experience of this was last year I was trying to install a smart meter in my apartment. I spent about a month trying to do this with various smart meters. I eventually gave up. My utility, who I won't name, but if you live in Belgium, you know who I'm talking about, just made it impossible for me. So how much of the fault here actually lies with the utilities?
Yes, so any kind of market players needs to be enabled and incentivized to make offers in that sense. So as Monica said, for consumers, for suppliers that have more than 100,000 consumers, they have to provide these offers. In most member states, this is not enforced, these rules. So there is no actual obligation for them to go in that direction. And so they would keep in the current tariffs, flat tariffs that they are used to. So only if there is a benefit for consumers and for the market players to go in that direction, then there will be a win-win. And the benefits for consumers is key, because it's the demand element that will drive them the business offer. And indeed, consumers need to understand that price fluctuations also throughout the day will be the norm. We need to really shift from a communication that is saying, well, what happened during the energy crisis was only a part of a critical situations. We need to allow and enable those market players that can run in this new situation of very and extensive flexibility throughout the days, and make those offers to enable consumers to play with that variability and to be rewarded for that. So it's a question of communication, but also enabling consumers, indeed, as someone was saying, to know what they can get and then ask for these offers. So price comparisons tools needs to make sure that consumers then are aware of what is the gains that they're getting for. So if we are getting these requests, there will be also then a possibility to have more and more offers, and indeed keeping the respect of laws a clear requirement. So ensuring that these offers are made to allow consumers to play this role.
Okay, so some of the fault lies with governments, some of the fault lies with utilities. Does some of the fault lie with consumers themselves? Thomas, you gave the statistic that 60% of consumers in Germany don't know what a dynamic tariff is, and only 8% of people can explain what it is. That starts to make it sound like this is something available only for elites, for educated, wealthy consumers. So is there a risk here that you're creating benefits for only a certain segment of society that can take advantage of it? And I also wonder how consumers' previous experiences with understanding the difference between dynamic tariffs, variable tariffs, fixed tariffs. Anyone on a variable tariff over the past couple of years would have had a pretty hard time of it with energy prices skyrocketing. So could that experience where people thought, well, I was on this variable tariff and I had a bad time of it because of, at the energy price situation over the past years, I don't want to now go to this dynamic tariff thing. It sounds like the same thing. Are consumers skeptical of this because of some bad experiences in the past?
So we don't have that many past experiences in Germany, as I mentioned. And the fault is, of course, not with the consumer himself, but with the way he's informed or she is informed. I think it's very important to reassure consumers in this debate. And one way this could be done is to give them pre-contractual information provided by suppliers and comparison tools. I think it's a key tool to nudge consumers towards dynamic tariffs. The way companies communicate at the moment, partly, is horrible, frankly. Like at the moment, personal experience, I do not understand my own tariff. I get communications where they say, look, this price formula, this is your price formula. And then I'm like, it's some coefficient multiplied by a couple of letters that apparently symbolizes the spot market. And I have to look up myself, what was it before? What is it now? I ask in an email, so is it cheaper now or is it more expensive? I do not get a reply. But on a more structural level, we could envisage a type of communication that is already in place for consumer investment products. So when you go to your bank and you ask, what should I invest my money in? The bank says, well, what risk type are you? And then they have different investment products that are linked to the different risk type. So a energy supplier could categorize dynamic tariffs into different categories, such as fixed dynamic, fixed prices, of course, dynamic prices with a cap, fully dynamic tariffs, and then they could match this with the risk profile of a consumer, in which you also take into account the shiftable loads that are in his home. Does he have a heat pump? Does he have a EV vehicle, and so on? And then they could compare this with a standard profile. So they could take his data. My energy provider has my data from last year. They could give me an alternative scenario. They could say, if you stay on this tariff, you pay this and this much. If you had chosen a dynamic tariff last year, you would have saved this and this much. And so I could make an informed decision based on real data and based on my own risk profile. And the same for comparison tools. At the moment, we see that that conventional tariffs are mixed in with dynamic tariffs, and that's difficult for consumers to differentiate sometimes. And when they look at the different comparisons, it makes it convoluted. So there could be a separate section for dynamic tariffs on comparison websites. There could be a a qualification, sort of a label. So there's many things that could be done from the communication side, and of course we're still talking about affordable, shiftable loads, affordable, digitally controllable consumption devices, affordable vehicles, affordable heat pumps. And that's a matter, it was also mentioned before, the tax system needs to be adjusted to make them the alternative, sustainable, cheap, easy choice. And subsidies. At the end of the day, if it doesn't work with market regulation, there needs to be subsidies to get it going.
Seb, I'll put the same question to you, Seb, about the customers themselves. How tech savvy does a consumer need to be to take advantage of dynamic tariffs? And is there a risk that this is only something available for educated, wealthy people, maybe people who can afford to take a risk on their utility bills, that they could afford to make an upfront investment in investing in a smart meter and taking a risk on a tariff that could go wrong for them? Is there a risk that you leave lower income consumers behind on this?
Yeah, good question. So certainly we need to sort out the infrastructure. I think that's one thing we're all going to agree on here. Smart metering and half-hourly settlement is a big barrier to deploying consumer flexibility, and we just need to do better and remove that. And that does explain a lot of perhaps low progress to date. In terms of is there a danger this creates an elite? I think there's potentially some substance to that argument today, but the remedy for it is just further decreases in the capital cost of heat pumps and EVs. And the data is trending in the right direction there. I think we can we have a lot of confidence that these are ultimately mass market propositions, and that is really starting to prove out now. So no, I don't think it's going to be a requirement to have thousands of pounds in the bank to participate in flexibly in the energy market. And certainly I don't think tech savviness needs to be a barrier there. And that's where the job really is on us as suppliers and solution providers to kind of innovate in that communication to the customer, make the proposition as easily understandable as possible. With that, I'll completely agree with the previous comments that communication historically has been terrible, right? And it's difficult for us as energy professionals to understand our bills. Like how do you think others are gonna deal with that? So but firmly I believe that this is a job for utilities, for the market participants to solve, and it's not a job for the regulator. That we understand our customers, we will experiment and find out what solutions actually are attractive, and the market forces are there. The business case for flexibility is so strong that with enough time, those market forces will clearly play out, and the consumers who understand the value of flexibility will benefit the most, and the utilities, the suppliers that build the most compelling offerings there as well. So I'm confident that the incentives exist. Now, clearly, there's more to be done on the policy front, but fundamentally, we don't need to rip up the energy market structure to make this happen.
Yup. Do you agree that this is a problem for the companies to solve, not necessarily the regulators? And second question, based on your research, who would you say are the best in class in Europe in terms of getting this moving, or who are the worst in class? Feel free to name those as
Yeah.
well.
Well, maybe starting with the first question. So I do think there's a need for innovation both amongst regulators as well as the market, and I strongly agree with Sebastian and others that have sort of demonstrated we need sort of a whole range of offers. And I think there can be competition in the market between the ways flexibility is rewarded towards the consumer. So the same technology enabling dynamic contracts can also enable different types of, let's say, upside only flexibility contracts where you as a consumer only see the benefits of a certain shiftable load, which, by the way, not necessarily has to be, let's say, a heat pump or an EV. It can also be a hot water tank. Many people in Europe use electricity for hot water production, which is a perfectly shiftable and load that can be automated. So there are great examples also from Ireland where they work with social housing companies to make this a flexible load in such a way that consumers still have the hot water when they need it, but do see the benefits of low electricity. And I think there's where we need innovation from regulators to make sure that those market conditions, those technical conditions, settlement processes, the access to smart meter data, I think mentioned by several. So if you can use your smart meter data in a price comparison tool, this tool can also demonstrate, well, we see you have a heat pump, hot water tank, EV. If this would be shifted, this would save you this and this amount per year. Likewise, suppliers can innovate, and I think the interesting bit with dynamic tariffs is that in some markets, it's actually disruptors that sort of gain the highest market share. So now in Germany, obviously with the first, and we've seen it's very low share still, but if I look at the Netherlands, the largest supplier of dynamic tariffs is actually the Automobile Association, which apparently conveys also a certain trustworthy image. So consumers feel that they are in safe hands. If we look at sort of front runners, I would say Scandinavian countries, most of them Baltic countries as well, very familiar with sort of the dynamic tariffs in terms of link to spot market. But you also see innovation in countries like Finland, where you still are on a sort of fixed or variable tariff, but based on the amount of electricity that is being shifted from your heat pump or EV charging, you get additional bonus payments. So we're seeing sort of innovation there. We also see strong innovation in things like smartphone apps. So the way these energy suppliers communicate with you, and obviously innovation in the way they communicate with flexible loads, so with your EV and heat pump, so to make it stress-free for you as a consumer. So I would say sort of overall competition in the market is sort of driving this and sort of innovation towards the user experience. I think we could do better, and I think it's not up to regulators to sort of impose it on the market, but there's still sort of a certain niche to, or maybe not a niche because it can be quite a substantial market share, to sort of provide consumers with the safety of, let's say, static prices, but still reward the flexibility. And I think Octopus has some great examples. I think Sebastian just shared about sort of how this could work for EV charging, but still giving consumers sort of the safety that they will not pay more than this and this amount of money, but still shift this, because actually shifting the demand is what we need to help decarbonize the power system and get low prices for everyone.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's go ahead and take some questions that have come in from the audience. Monica, I'll put this first question to you, and it has to do with basically whether or not the smart meters and dynamic tariffs, do they really deliver a climate benefit that makes all of this investment worth it? All of the work that the commission would have to do to make this a widespread reality, is it worth the time and effort? So the question is from Myra Madala from Knauf Insulation. Shouldn't energy efficiency measures be prioritized first and foremost, rather than all this that we've been talking about?
Of course, energy efficiency first. Well, I think it's not either or. I think, for instance, with smart metering, with the data, which the consumers can, in fact, benefit from smart metering because they can get better understanding of their energy consumption. So it is not only about shifting and dynamic pricing, but also to understand their energy use and what they can maybe improve. So of course, investments in energy efficiencies are important, but this doesn't, of course, it's not either or. I would also mention maybe the smart meter rollout as I mentioned, it's a delayed. The smart meter rollout is delayed, and we should of course speed that up. In terms of demand response, and I wanted to also react to. I think it's important for the decentralization, for the digitalization. It's simple as that. I think there is not really a question whether smart meter rollout yes or no, because we will have more renewables in the system. We will have more electrification. Michael was talking about it. So we also need the consumer side to engage, and smart meters can help consumers to engage. I would also like to react maybe to the one of the questions whether everybody needs to participate in demand response or in dynamic pricing. And I think here it's important to also mention that maybe even those, so if we have demand response and dynamic pricing in place and we start and consume, not everybody doesn't have to be actually on those, of course, because demand response as such will reduce wholesale market price peaks and elevate network congestion. So that means that the systemic benefits will be reflected in all contracts types over time. So I think this is also important to consider. There should always be choice for consumers, and they should always get information so that they understand what is in it for them. And there's, of course, work to do on that side. But I just wanted to stress also the system benefits, which will be for everybody.
Okay, thanks. So let's take the next question that's come in from the audience. This question is from John Lynch from the CRU. Michael, I'll put this question to you. So John asks, how critical is automation and built-in intelligence, such as home energy management systems, for consumers to respond to price signals and get the most savings from dynamic tariffs?
Great question. And indeed, automation will make the difference because consumers need to have simple offers, get rewarded normally by monetary savings, or on top of that, even making money, and having automated, so they do not need to know all the complexities of the energy system. They do not need to check with their phones, oh, now electricity prices are increasing, oh, now electricity prices are decreasing, so I need to adjust my consumption. Automation can make the difference. And home energy management systems can help in that proposal. And this is also very much linked to the previous question on the difference or complementary between energy efficiency and demand-side flexibility. Home energy management system at the moment are used to optimize energy consumption to as an energy efficiency tool. But if you use energy management systems in an interoperable way, so they are able also to adjust the consumption of all the decentralized energy resources, all assets behind the meter, in reactions to signals that they are receiving from the system, like through dynamic price contracts, then you will have the possibility to have a tool, management systems, to both be an efficient player, but also a demand-side flexibility enabler. So linking automation with dynamic price contracts would make the best combination to simplify and get more out of this active use of our assets behind the meter in our homes.
Okay, great. So next question here comes from Matt Gardner from the UK Consumer Association. I'll put this question to Thomas. So the question is, how might the consumer benefits of dynamic tariffs change over time? Will they get higher as renewables penetration increases or reduce as others have already increased their flexibility? So what's the best time to get in on this as a consumer? Is it now or should you wait?
That's a very technical question. In Germany, we have the situation that we have now paragraph 14 of our network law, and it foresees time variable tariffs if time variable network tariffs, meaning when the networks are congested and you throttle your heat pump, your e-vehicle, you get money because you're saving the system. At the same time, in theory, you can have a dynamic tariff that gives you the biggest savings when there is the biggest amount of renewables in the system and you use it because the price is, let's say, negative for a while. So these two things don't match. If I'm supposed to use a lot of energy because there is a lot of energy, but the amount of energy congests the network and therefore I'm supposed to throttle my devices and not use so much energy, then it doesn't match. Now, in a day-to-day scenario, this is an extreme case where this happens. You would have to live in a street with a lot of heat pumps, a unfinished distribution grid, a unfit distribution grid that cannot support all this renewable energy, and therefore you would have to dim your devices. Most people will be able to fully benefit from their dynamic tariff and make the most out of the cheap renewable energy that is in the system. So getting in at the right time, I don't think there is a right time. There is a right time for each individual consumer. Also coming back to the tech savviness, home automation, that's the key, yes. And that will tell you, together with good pre-contractual or even, contractual information, whether you are the type to benefit from it or not. But consumers won't sit down and measure, their water tanks and say, I have 80 liters in the bathroom and 15 liters in the kitchen, so it needs to be automated. However, a home automation system or an electricity energy management system can easily cost €1,000. And some providers charge you double-digit numbers for storing your data in the cloud. So storing the data with the energy management provider. These are all piling up costs. €20 for the smart meter, double-digit numbers for the smart home, high numbers for the infrastructure costs, high numbers for the cabinet, as I mentioned before, and it needs to be compensated. So it really, I think at the moment we're doing this for the grid mostly. We're doing this for the systemic change, for making it possible to use the renewable energies that we have. I personally believe it's the worst thing that you can tell consumers, that you have a lot of wind parks, but you have to switch them off all the time because you cannot use the renewable energy. So we're making this from a climate perspective, we're making this from a systemic perspective, and now we need to make sure that consumers actually benefit also financially. And that brings me back to change the tax system, make sure that they are safe, and give them the right information and subsidies if needed.
Seb, same question to you, Seb. So do you agree that it's really very dependent on the consumer's individual situation. And then also, I'm going to put a second audience question to you, Seb, for you to answer second. So this question is from Thomas Lobe. Do speakers know if there is a correlation between high level of smart meter deployment and dynamic tariffs? So in your experience, do areas that have more deployment of smart meters then have more people willing to do dynamic tariffs?
Great. Yes, I'll take the first one. Is there a right time to get into this? We're short flexibility, and the energy system is only going to get shorter on flexibility. The drivers are strong, and they are getting stronger. So, absolutely, I don't think there's any kind of any assessment to be done there necessarily. It's a case of maximizing it now and getting as much as possible into our energy system. It will be the cheapest source of flexibility, and it will mean we can do net zero faster and quicker than if we don't mass deploy consumer flex. So agree with Thomas in terms of removing those barriers. So we've now got this 1 gigawatt of EV customers which we can control, and there is no physical HEMS there. It's a virtual HEMS, so there's no cost there to the customer, and they can get their smart meter as well at zero cost. There is no upfront payment needed, and that's what's really enabled us to grow that EV tariff so rapidly. So I think we need to look as to whether it really is appropriate to be attaching any upfront capex to enable these business models, because certainly in the UK we've found that's not needed. Sorry, the second question was, do we see, is there a correlation between dynamic tariffs and smart meter deployment? Certainly it's a necessary component, right? We just need to stop having this discussion, really. I think that's the one thing we all agree. We just need to get out there and get it sorted. And then, once we've got those fundamental building blocks in place and we have, an appropriate market structure, agree with the comments around kind of sorting out taxation regime as well to kind of pass through the signals from the wholesale market as cleanly as possible. That will, once we've got that wholesale market functioning, then we will see the innovative offerings appear, and they are appearing. So it's a conversation I would love to not be having, the next time we're on a panel, because we've just got smart meters done and it's no longer a topic.
I'll put that second question to you also. So do you also think there is an obvious correlation between people having smart meters and people choosing dynamic tariffs? And also let me put another question to you from John Lynch from CRU. What is the experience in member states without using such technology, but where customers have responded manually to dynamic prices? So are there places where it has been the case that customers are kind of doing it themselves manually, the old-fashioned way, and is that actually working?
Mm-hmm. So I think to answer the last question, so that's also happening. I think it's also sort of the starting point, I would say, in many of those Scandinavian frontrunner countries. So the default was that you would be on a dynamic tariff in some of those markets, or it became the default, even without, let's say, home energy management systems being rolled out to consumers. And they were already seeing savings, partly because of that, but also partly because they did learn to see a correlation, not necessarily from the direct price signal, but just, knowing it's a windy day today. So probably energy prices will be lower, or the sun is shining now during midday, so prices will be lower. I think those are sort of simple mechanisms that work well for, let's say, the human part of the demand adjustment. I think the first part, having smart meters in place not necessarily means that we see a high penetration of dynamic tariffs in markets. And partly because there are so many layers to that. So it's the technical installation of smart meters. Are these smart meters being settled at the right interval? So are they using 15-minute or half-hour values, let's say on the backside in the energy markets, or are consumers still on standard load profiles? So I think just having the smart meters is not enough. We need more to get that to get that market going, and maybe responding also to sort of another question I saw, and I think it's a bit linked. Sort of, what if you make dynamic tariffs the default? I'm not quite sure if it should be the default, but if we talk about sort of some of the flexible loads in households, like heat pumps, like EV charging, like hot water tanks, it would be great if those devices would by default be responsive to the system and shift their consumption to lower price periods on the grid, even if the consumer is not on a dynamic tariff yet, but sort of getting that in place into that technology, I think is a key enabler. So people see that it's working for them, and that can sort of remove some of the anxiety about sort of being exposed to those prices.
Yeah, let me put that question about this idea of having it be the default to Monica. So that question is from Matt Gardner from Which. The question is, one heavy-handed way to get consumers onto dynamic prices is to make them the default option. Could there ever be a case for moving consumers to dynamic tariffs unless they opt out, and under what conditions? And Monica, allow me to put a second question to you from the audience as well. This is from anonymous attendee. Why did the Commission put a warning label on dynamic tariffs in the EMD review when we want to promote them? This fed the idea that only fixed price tariffs can protect consumers, which is just wrong, as fixed price offers signals during peak episodes and lock consumers with high prices.
Thank you. So to your first question, whether dynamic pricing should be the default option, I'm not sure that would completely work if we start forcing people without actually giving them choice. So I think the opt-in works better in this case. And of course, it requires quite some effort in terms of explanation, in terms of communication, designing the offer that will actually be interesting and attractive and nudge consumers into. There may be, and we saw it in some markets, if I understand correctly, for instance, the Spanish regulated tariff is somehow linked to a dynamic. So maybe there can be a certain, let's say, inspiration at the national level when designing, for instance, the regulated tariff. But I would not recommend to go for opt-out in terms of obligatory dynamic pricing. We should always give consumers a choice to choose. And to the second question, I saw it in the chat. I also wanted to react to that. So thanks for raising that. In EMD, there's no label on dynamic pricing. What the electricity market reform did was it amended Article 11, which was previously on entitlement to dynamic pricing. We saw during the energy crisis that the fixed price contracts very often disappeared. So that was just to enlarge the scope and give consumers again the choice. to have either fixed price or dynamic. And in fact, also during the negotiations, we had this discussion, what is kind of signal this article will send to stakeholders and to policymakers at the national level. And that's why there is also clear text in the directive, in Article 11, you can see, which states that fixed-term, fixed-price contracts should not exclude possibility for the consumers' participation when they decide so in demand response, energy sharing, and for actively contributing to the achievement of flexibility needs. So these are complementary, and it's indeed just to enlarge consumer choice. It's not about labeling of dynamic pricing contracts.
Let me just check on the panel. Is there anyone who does think that forced opt-out contracts would be a good idea? Raise your hand if you think it's a good idea. Nobody. Okay. So there's an answer from the consensus on the panel with that. So I want to, before we close out, I'd like to get the key takeaways from the panelists from today's discussions about what you think is the next step here. What do you think we need to do to make dynamic tariffs a reality based on everything we've heard today? Let me get your quick 1-minute takeaway statements here. Thomas, let's start with you.
Okay, so I think consumers need agency. So they need access to affordable, digitally controllable consumption devices, heat pumps, e-vehicles. I've said it a lot of times. Households need information. Terms and conditions will get more convoluted in the future. They need pre-contractual information. Households need comparison tools to tell if the tariff is financially attractive. Households need a choice between different tariff models. Some consumers value the security that a fixed price tariff brings with them, and they are willing to pay for it. Households need protection from extreme scenarios, especially after the energy price crisis. We had the price break in Germany, 40 cents per kilowatt hour. It also applied to dynamic tariffs. It might serve as a good precedence to look into how this worked, because it gave consumers the security not to overpay, while at the same time testing the dynamic tariffs for the first time under a price break. Thank you.
Okay, Seb, let's go to you next. What do you think need to be the next steps here to make this a reality?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess, yeah, my closing comment would be like focus on the underlying market design. Remove the distortions like volumetric policy costs on electricity bills. Look at, leave something that is coherent and interoperable. So for us, that's mainly around kind of improving the granularity of the wholesale market, shorter settlement periods, more locational pricing. And once we have that well-performing underlying market function, we will see the innovation come from retailers. And don't over-regulate. Don't worry about the categorization. Let the market do its job, and we'll get there.
Okay, Jaap, what do you think should be the next steps?
So I think important point raised by the two previous panelists. So I think it's really key that we ensure that all consumers can benefit from demand-side flexibility, and that we look for ways to how to work with consumers, how to make sure that they can really be active, but also feel secure to provide flexibility. So not coerce them into flexibility, but sort of enable them to see the benefits. I think the BEUC report is really providing those great insights. I think it's especially for policymakers and regulators a message: don't shy away from dynamic tariffs or the underlying technology that sort of enables dynamic tariffs. We need more of that. We need more of default smart heat pumps, smart boilers, smart EV charging, so that the shifting to lower price periods is being automated, even if you're not on a dynamic tariff yet. And I think the point of price comparison tools is really key, making sure that we educate and inform consumers about the benefits. And for instance, using historical smart meter data to then present them, well, you could have saved this and this amount of money if you were on a dynamic tariff, can be in an important instrument there. But for now, so the final remark, we do need to make sure that all 27 European member states sort of fully implement all those building blocks, because we're not there yet today, unfortunately.
Michael, what would you like to see for the next steps?
Different things. So first of all, communication. So we need to have from politicians, from energy ministers, to NRAs, to local authorities, to one-stop shop, to stop making confusion and being clear that price fluctuations will be the norm, and there is a possibility to have run this option as a win-win for consumers. Second one is to understand really the responsibilities. Retailers need to offer dynamic price contracts and other type of hybrid options. There is a multitude, a myriad of options, so combined flat and flexible for some period, for some moments. And then understand instead the responsibility for system operators, because system operators needs to deploy the meters, not retailers in most cases. And they need to be incentivized, both of them, to go in that directions. Third, to allow choice for consumers, as many said, that could be indeed a choice not to engage with dynamic price contracts with the entire energy loads of our homes, of our buildings, but also with some of these appliances. And for these, we need, of course, have a dedicated retail tariffs, but also sub-meters that could be limited to the activation of only one appliance. And the fourth recommendation maybe would be indeed the rewards. If consumers do not see the rewards, notably savings of going in that direction, then they will never engage in that.
And finally, Monica, you're probably the one people want to hear from the most because, of course, we have the new commission term coming up by the end of this year, and everybody wants to know what's going to be on the agenda for the next term. So what do you think we need for next steps at EU level, based on everything we just heard from the other panelists, in order to make dynamic tariffs a reality?
Thank you. I think one of the key aspects has been part of this commission and will probably be also for the next commission is implementation. So I will repeat myself, implementation, implementation, implementation. We need to make sure that these offers we have been discussing for now 1.5 hours actually become a reality. So whatever that means technically, from smart meters, enabling technologies, heat pumps, you know, this encompasses different legislations and frameworks, but we have the rules, the market rules already at the EU level. It is existing. And the second point, I think, and it was also heavily discussed, is that it will be for companies to nudge consumers into these new offers. So these are two main points.
Great, thanks. Thanks to all the panelists for great contributions here. To kind of sum up the messages that we heard today, I think a consistent theme was that based on what happened over the past years, we know that consumers need protection from high energy prices. And the big question is whether dynamic tariffs can protect them, or does it present a risk at a time when consumers are feeling particularly skittish? I think what we heard today is this is a nuanced answer, that there isn't a clear yes or no. Based on the report, based on what we've heard, a lot of the specifics here are dependent on the consumer's individual circumstance. But by and large, dynamic tariffs offer an excellent opportunity for consumers to save money and for a greener distribution of the power grid, particularly as we're looking at more renewable energy coming online. But we also heard that all consumers need to benefit from this, not just the wealthiest or most educated consumers. We heard that the knowledge of dynamic tariffs right now is pretty low, and that companies really need to nudge consumers, as Monica said, in order to inform them about this. We heard this, I think, from all the panelists, that communication is really key here, that the consumers need to know about these tariffs and need to know how they can benefit from them. And as Jaap said, one of the ways that you could do that really effectively is using historical smart meter data. So actually showing them, look, I brought the receipts. Here is how you can save money. I think that's in particular going to be very convincing for consumers. And I think the main theme also that we heard was that consumers need to feel secure enough in order to make this choice. And we had consensus among the panelists that they need to make the choice themselves. They don't need to be coerced or forced into these types of contracts. Nobody seemed to like that idea. So I think for sure this has given us a lot of food for thought as we move into the next term, which will be, as Monica noted, very much about implementation after the huge raft of legislation affecting the energy sector that we've had over the past term. So I want to extend a real note of appreciation for the panelists for being here with us this morning and expressing their views. And also a big thank you to the audience. I can tell everybody's really passionate about this subject because there have been some great conversations happening in the chat. So I'm really heartened to see this big enthusiasm here for making this happen. I think it's a good rallying cry going forward. So thank you so much to all of you for spending your morning with us. And I wish you a great rest of the day and a fantastic weekend.